Texas Senator Ted Cruz, thank you so much. We appreciate it. So today, the U.S. military shot down its second object out of the sky, and in a week.
Yep.
What do you know about this, and what's your level of concern?
Well, the object today, I don't know anything beyond what has been reported, which is that they shot down an unknown object that was about 40,000 feet in the air above Alaska. I'm glad the administration, I'm glad the president moved swiftly this time. I think the incident with the Chinese spy balloon, the administration did not handle well. Yesterday I spent 2 hours in a classified briefing going through what transpired with the Chinese spy balloon, where it ended up that balloon was allowed to enter U.S. airspace and to conduct espionage, to remain over U.S. airspace for over a week. And the president did not shoot it down, did not stop it from engaging in that espionage, allowed it to transverse the entire United States, and only shot it down after the mission was over, after it had collected whatever espionage it was seeking to gather, and it was hovering over sensitive military facilities with secrets that we don't want the Chinese to know, and presumably it was broadcasting the data it was collecting up to a satellite and back to Beijing. The president should have acted swiftly when that Chinese spy balloon first entered U.S. airspace to shoot it down before it conducted espionage. He didn't. One of the problems is the administration didn't even let him know it had happened until several days after it had crossed into U.S. airspace. And so I think the president delayed too long, and today the swift action is probably a result of that they didn't want to delay too long a second time.
What's going on here? I mean, we don't know where this object came from just yet, but what's going on here? I mean, is China testing us?
It certainly could be. With the object today, all I know is what's in the paper. So I'll be back in D.C. next week. I expect I'll have a classified briefing and know more. But at least what the Pentagon is saying publicly is that it was an unknown object. It was apparently about the size of a small car. So it was substantially smaller than the payload that was on the Chinese balloon. It was at 40,000 feet instead of 60,000 feet, which was the altitude the Chinese balloon was flying at. And what they are publicly saying is they don't know who owns it, they don't know what country owns it, so they don't have the same indication that we had with the Chinese balloon that we knew it came from China. I hope we'll have more clarity. It was downed in the ocean, and so they're endeavoring a salvage operation now to try to find it and figure out what it is. Presumably, before they shot it down, the pilots examined it, I would imagine. So we may have, I imagine we have at a minimum video images or pictures of what it was, and so that they may be able to ascertain what exactly it was, but as of right now, they haven't publicly informed anyone.
A lot of other issues to ask you about, but I want to get right to 2024. You've said you're running for re-election for the U.S. Senate. A lot of people are wondering, are you running for president as well?
Look, my focus is on running for re-election to the Senate, and the Senate is the battleground right now. You know, you look at what's going on in Washington. I think the Biden administration, their agenda is hurting the people of Texas. I think we're on the wrong track. About 70% of Americans agree we're on the wrong track. You look at the results of the last 2 years of policy, out-of-control spending that has produced inflation that is hammering Texans across the state. We've got crime that has skyrocketed across the country, and we've got the worst illegal immigration in the history of our country, chaos at our southern border. And my job, a job I'm very proud to hold, is to represent 30 million Texans, to go every day to Washington and fight for the safety and security of Texans, to fight for jobs. As you know, you and I have talked many times, my number one priority is jobs. Jobs, 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 because that's Texans' number one priority. People come to Texas because Texas is where the jobs are, and the way you create an environment where there are lots and lots of jobs is you limit taxes, you limit regulations, you allow small businesses to flourish and prosper. And so I am very much focused on fighting for Texans every day and fighting against these disastrous policies coming from the Biden administration.
So have you ruled out a run for the White House?
I think there'll be plenty of time to discuss the 2024 presidential race. I'm running for re-election to the Senate, and the Senate, just this week, I was named the ranking member of the Senate Commerce Committee, the senior Republican on the Senate Commerce Committee. The Commerce Committee has jurisdiction over about half of the United States economy. It has jurisdiction over a lot of industries that are really pivotal to the state of Texas. All of aviation, we had the first hearing examining Southwest and what happened with the winter storm that caused them to cancel 16,000 flights. We're going to be working on a reauthorization for the FAA, and there are tens of thousands of aviation jobs throughout the state of Texas. Space, where I've been the leading Republican on space for 10 years in the Senate. Space is within the Commerce Committee jurisdiction. NASA, we've got both NASA jobs and commercial space jobs that are critically important. I believe we're going to move bipartisan space legislation forward. The Coast Guard, we've seen Coast Guardsmen do incredible heroism for Texas. In Hurricane Harvey, the swimmers that went off the helicopters and pulled Texans out of harm's way were incredibly heroic. We're going to reauthorize the Coast Guard this year. And then when you look at spectrum, we've got a lot of telecom in the state of Texas. I think the single greatest regulatory opportunity we have to create a ton of new jobs is freeing up spectrum to auction off to the private sector so that you can see 5G expand, you can see telecom expand. And so I'm leading the effort, the bipartisan effort to get that done. At the same time, I'm also leading the effort to engage in oversight of big tech, of the abuse of power we've seen from big tech, whether it's censorship and silencing voices that they don't like or abusing their monopoly power to favor their own goods and services. I think there is a lot of work to be done right now for the state of Texas on the Commerce Committee, and I'm very, very proud to be leading the Republicans on that committee.
We reported on that committee hearing yesterday, and one thing that you said, you warned against imposing new regulations, government regulations on the airlines. Why was that important? And why do you do you think that that message was received? Do Democrats feel the same way, who control the Senate?
So not all of them. Listen, what happened with Southwest, there were millions of passengers who were delayed or stranded over Christmas because Southwest. And I've spoken with the senior leadership of Southwest. They've admitted they screwed up. They screwed up. It was unacceptable, and a lot of people were severely inconvenienced as a result of it. That's frustrating. At the same time, I recognize Southwest is a great Texas company. I fly Southwest probably every single week. I joke, I call Southwest the company plane because I'm on their plane so often. And I think most days Southwest Airlines does a phenomenal job of getting you where you need to go, doing so in an inexpensive manner so that air travel is affordable, and doing so with a smile. I like that the Southwest flight attendants are as likely to pick up the microphone and start singing a jingle into the microphone. So they do a lot of things well. And so I approached the hearing this week. I wanted to make sure it wasn't just an excuse for Democrats to beat up on Southwest. Yes, they screwed up. Yes, they need to make customers whole, and I was very glad to see that Southwest has been proactive, leaning forward to refunding people flights, to giving them 25,000 frequent flyer miles, to leaning in and covering costs that people incurred. All of those were the right things to do. But I didn't want it to become just Democrats treating Southwest like a piñata and taking shots at them. And I also don't want what happened there to become an excuse for the Biden administration re-regulating aviation. Used to be that commercial airlines were very heavily regulated. Prices were very heavily regulated. And when that happened, they were really expensive. Many people couldn't afford to buy a plane ticket because it was very expensive. We had tremendous success in this country when we deregulated the airlines and allowed price competition. And it's actually what led to the rise of low-cost carriers like Southwest that drive down costs for everyone else. And so my view of the regulatory mission when it comes to aviation is on safety, we shouldn't compromise. And on the FAA, we need to ensure the FAA is imposing serious standards to keep the flying public safe. That's the number one obligation of the regulators. But what we shouldn't be doing is letting Democrats set prices and micromanage and determine how many drink tickets is Jack Fink going to get when he gets on the next plane. You know what? That's not a question for the government to answer. I think the free market works pretty well on that.
Are you satisfied with Southwest's answers that they are going to make the necessary upgrades to prevent a meltdown like that?
Look, I think they are saying the right things. We also had at the hearing, we had the head of the Southwest Pilots Union. And the Pilots Union expressed real frustration that they felt Southwest was not implementing the reforms they're suggesting. So I think this is going to be an ongoing effort. Southwest laid out that they had a problem in terms of their software allocating crews and getting the right crews to the right places, and that they announced that they're investing $1.3 billion in upgrading the software. That certainly seems like a promising step. They also said that one of the reasons they had a differential, that they had ended up doing a lot worse with this storm than other airlines, is because they did not have sufficient de-icing equipment in a number of airports, and so they were underprepared. At the hearing, they said it's going to take them some time to correct that failing. So, you know, I'm going to continue talking to them closely and keep pressing them to move forward to do everything possible to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Let's talk about the border. You mentioned it before. What is it going to take for Republicans and Democrats in Congress to pass legislation to solve the issues that we're seeing?
Well, listen, the fundamental problem is Democrats and this administration, they don't want to solve these issues. The crisis at our border is man-made. So 2 years ago, we had achieved the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. 2 years ago, it was working really, really well. So what happened? What happened to mess it up so badly? Joe Biden became president, and literally the very first week in office, he made 3 decisions. Number one, he immediately halted construction of the border wall. Ordered literally workers to drop their tools where they stood. Number two, he reinstated the failed policy of catch and release, so that when people are apprehended, they're given a court date sometime in the future, they're released, and the vast majority of them are never seen again and they never come back. And number three, he pulled out of the incredibly successful Remain in Mexico agreement, an agreement that President Trump had negotiated with the government of Mexico, whereby people who crossed illegally into Mexico remained in Mexico while their asylum case was proceeding in the U.S. And Remain in Mexico was an unmitigated success. It produced the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. His first week in office, Joe Biden just tore that international agreement to bits. And what has resulted is the highest rate of illegal immigration in the history of our country. 5.5 million people have crossed illegally since Biden became president. And Jack, I spend a lot of time on the southern border. I spend a lot of time down in the Rio Grande Valley. It has never been remotely this bad. And it's, you ask, what's it going to take? It's going to take the Democrats being willing to do their job. They have caused this, and they're not willing to change. Alejandro Mayorkas, who's the Secretary of Homeland Security, I believe the House of Representatives is going to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas. Why? For complete failure to do his job. But it's not just, actually, if Secretary Mayorkas did nothing, that would be better than what he's doing, because he's not just not enforcing the law, he is actively frustrating and flouting federal immigration law. His effort is trying to make illegal immigration faster and more efficient. And so what happens now, you know, several times I've taken senators down to the southern border to see firsthand what's going on. And you go out on midnight patrol with the Border Patrol, which I've done many times. You don't have to go looking for people. Within minutes, they find you. They come up and turn themselves into you. Why? Because they know when they turn themselves into the Biden administration, that the Biden administration is going to put them on a plane or put them on a bus and send them to every city in America. And that this administration is essentially the last mile in the human trafficking network. And as a result of Joe Biden's becoming president, the trafficking cartels in Mexico are making billions from human trafficking and drug trafficking. Last year, we had over 100,000 deaths from overdoses, most of which were from Chinese fentanyl flooding across the southern border. That's the consequence of these failed policies. And what it's going to take is for the Democrats to stop giving in to the extremes in their party that want open borders, and for them to be willing to enforce the law and follow the law.
So my question is, have you had discussions with Governor Abbott? And when I've talked to state Democrats, state elected officials who are Democrats, they say the Biden administration needs to do more. And so what I'm wondering is, have you had conversations with members of Congress, Democrats from across the state, and lead it an effort out as opposed to the other way? In other words, from Texas and move it outward. I mean, anything like that?
So I've had conversations with a lot of Democrats in Texas, and you're right. Democrat state elected officials are typically much more reasonable on this issue. When I'm down in South Texas, we'll often do roundtables with elected sheriffs and mayors and county judges and local officials. And in the Rio Grande Valley, many of the elected officials are Democrats there. And they're dealing with this chaos every day. So one prominent elected Democrat in South Texas, I remember he told me, he said, listen, if my party in Washington is for open borders, I can't support that. There's a disconnect between Democrats in the state and Washington Democrats. What happens when people join the House of Representatives or the Senate or the White House, the Democrats there are perfectly fine with open borders. Listen, Kamala Harris is ostensibly the border czar. She hasn't been to the Rio Grande Valley once since she was named border czar. Joe Biden went 2 years without going to the border. Then finally, just recently, he went to El Paso. Now, El Paso is not the epicenter of the crisis. The epicenter of the crisis is the Rio Grande Valley, which is about 800 miles away. When he went to El Paso has been struggling under illegal immigration. The Democrat mayor there has declared an emergency. There are homeless people, illegal immigrants, homeless people filling the streets. Well, what happened before Joe Biden came? They cleaned all the illegal immigrants off the street. They put them away so they had a photo op, and amazingly enough, Biden managed to go down to the border and not see a single illegal immigrant. And I will say, having been there, you really have to work to manage to protect the president from even seeing an illegal immigrant. And there's a reason for this, Jack. You can't see what's happening and defend it. I've seen little boys and little girls who've been physically abused and sexually abused by the cartels, and they are coming in by the thousands. I've seen women violently raped by the cartels. I've sat down with Texas farmers and ranchers, and they pull out photographs, pictures of dead body after dead body after dead body, of children and pregnant women and elderly people abandoned to die. This is not humane. What Joe Biden and the Democrats are doing, it's not compassionate. It is cruel. There is massive human suffering that is resulting from these open borders. And I have been leading the fight for 10 years to secure the border. Under President Trump, we had enormous successes. And Joe Biden, when he became president, set to trying to unwind, to undo all of those successes. And tragically, the people of Texas are paying the price.
Is there room for any compromise for Republicans and Democrats to come together to, maybe not on a huge, comprehensive immigration bill, but there have got to be some areas, I would imagine, where Democrats and Republicans agree? Why not start small and work?
Look, there should be. In a reasonable and rational world, a few years back, Democrats used to say, we want to secure the border. Barack Obama used to say, I want to secure the border. Hillary Clinton used to say, I want to secure the border. And in fact, they would act to do so. So Barack Obama, I disagreed with a lot of Obama's policies, but Barack Obama deported millions of people. He actually enforced existing immigration law. What Joe Biden is doing has never happened in the history of the country. For this president to say, it doesn't matter what the law says, we're just going to let you go, that has created this crisis. And In Washington right now, there are no moderate Democrats. In the last Congress, I forced a bill, a vote on the Senate floor, that we should not send stimulus checks to millions of illegal immigrants. Every single Democrat voted no, all of them. It failed by one vote. If even a single Democrat had voted with me, it would have passed. I forced another vote that said we shouldn't send stimulus checks to criminals who are in jail, rapists, murderers, child molesters. Every single Democrat voted no. It failed by one vote. Unfortunately, today's Democrat Party has gotten really extreme. And it's why we're saying, listen, I have to say, a lot of us in the Senate scratch our heads and we don't recognize the Joe Biden that is in the White House. We don't recognize the Joe Biden that gave an angry and divisive State of the Union speech earlier this week. We all know Joe. We've all served with Joe. The Joe Biden who swore me into the Senate 10 years ago is nowhere to be found because unfortunately this White House has given the agenda over to the extremes in their party. And I think that is unfortunate, and it's why we've seen such bad policy the last 2 years, and bad policy targeting the state of Texas in particular.
I did want to ask you one other question. I appreciate your time. And that was on the coming debt ceiling debate. And so I'm wondering, Democrats are concerned that Republicans in the House are going to force the country to go into default. And Republicans are concerned, they say, that the Democrats are going to keep spending or try to tax their way out of this. And so I'm wondering, is there any real discussion going on with Democrats and Republicans in the Senate right now that will lead to, trying to get this debt down without forcing the country into default?
So right now what we're seeing is a game of chicken on both sides. There are conversations that are starting to happen. That's encouraging. Let me start by saying we should never, ever, ever default on the debt. Period. The end. And by the way, Joe Biden could do that today. He could stand up and say, under no circumstances would the United States ever default on the debt. Why could he do that? Because even if without the debt ceiling being raised, every month the federal tax revenues that the federal government receives significantly exceed the cost of paying interest on the debt. And so Joe Biden could prioritize and say, we will not default. That would be the responsible thing to do. The person threatening default is Joe Biden. And he's doing it because the Democrats have spent at a level never seen before in the history of this country, trillions of dollars of spending. When you pay your rent each month and the price is much, much higher, when you go fill up your tank, when you go check out at the grocery store and the price is 20, 30% higher, the inflation that we're seeing is because of the trillions of dollars that Democrats have spent over the last 2 years.
Well, Republicans have spent it as well.
Republicans have spent, to be sure, and Republicans spent too much, but what the Democrats did is they took it and put it on steroids. And so my view on the debt ceiling is that the Republican majority in the House should use the debt ceiling as leverage to force real and meaningful reforms to address the out-of-control spending and debt that we have. That doesn't mean solve it all with a magic wand. But history is very much on my side on this, and that if you look back and ask, okay, when has Congress ever managed to hold back from its addiction to spending? And the answer has been the most effective lever historically has been the debt ceiling. So for example, in 2010, the Budget Control Act was passed because House Republicans held the line on the debt ceiling and they said, we won't raise the debt ceiling unless we have meaningful spending restraint. And the Budget Control Act, which Barack Obama signed into law, ended up saving trillions of dollars for this country. So it was a major step forward. If you go back before that, Graham-Rudman, the most significant structural spending reform Congress has seen in 50 years. It was authored by Phil Gramm, former senator from Texas. That came on the debt ceiling because Senate Republicans held the line and said, we're not going to raise the debt ceiling unless we do something meaningful to fix the problem. there is a pattern of success. Now, the Biden White House started off with a patently unreasonable position. They said, we're not going to negotiate, we're not willing to do anything, we just want a blank check. That wasn't reasonable. And I'm glad to say it was so unreasonable that Biden couldn't hold that line very long. So Kevin McCarthy, the new speaker, has already gone to the White House, has negotiated with President Biden. I saw Kevin this week. His report on the conversation was that it was productive, that they were starting to have a positive negotiation. I'm encouraged by that. We need to reach a resolution that does two things. Number one, does not default on the debt, period, the end. But number two, does something to rein in the out-of-control spending.
Texas Senator Ted Cruz, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack.
Good to be with you.